Mulch, check. Soil? Ooh, I don't know. We need to know about soil. What is it made up of and why is it so damn potent? Right here on the Backyard Gardens podcast.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Welcome to the Backyard Gardens podcast, where we talk about all things gardening and give the information out for you to be successful in your garden, whether it's your first or your last. We are your hosts, Ben, the backyard gardener, and
Batavia, the front yard gardener.
one in the country,
One in the city.
Now get ready as we dig deep into this wonderful world of gardening as we learn to grow and grow for change. I'm having some serious mechanical difficulties with my equipment here, but that's okay. Soil.
I forgot to hide myself.
Oh, you be looking at yourself the whole time?
Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want too much more of that, right? Leads to doing some strange things.
Don't be doing it. Don't be doing it. You excited to talk about dirt?
Oh, yeah, I live for it, man.
Do you?
Yeah, no.
It's like, I think it's like the most unsexy topic you could talk about in gardening.
Don't you think that there is some general expectation? I think that people get it's dirt, you're going to be in the dirt. I think there's a whole thing around like bugs and all of that people don't really like. That's the real dirty secret for gardening.
Right.
But I think people accept the idea that, there's dirt involved. No?
I don't know. Well, first of all, I did a poll on my Instagram and I was just like, have you ever had a soil test? And, or would you ever get one? And 98% of the people answered no, don't know, don't care. And there's just a handful of people that were like, yeah, I definitely have gotten a soil test or I'm curious about it. And it was very interesting to me because I was the same way. I was like, I'll never get a soil test until I had an issue. And then I got a soil test and oh boy.
See, it's what's the old saying? Be careful what you look for. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a good practice to have. You know what I mean? I think it's a good thing to kind of, especially if you're really into gardening and, we've talked about before pushing the level of what your soil can handle, growing constantly. Sure. I think it's important to stay on top of it. So it was interesting.
But for you, didn't you experience some growing issues? And I thought that's what led you to,
Yes.
realizing that there's something that's not quite right here. Let me get this tested to determine what's what and who's who.
Yeah. So, the wild garden, I wanted to get tested anyways, because I had never really planted in all my years of gardening. I've never just really said, okay, I'm going to plant in the virgin soil. And, so I was curious about that anyways, and it wasn't as productive as I would like. And then throughout last year, the rest of my gardens, there was some weird stuff going on that I just couldn't pinpoint. You know what I mean? You ever get like an issue, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's this, it's that. There was just something I couldn't figure out. So I was like, what the hell? I'm going to get a soil test anyways. And it's free through my extension service. At the right time of year, it's free. So I was like, hell, let's do it. So learned a lot. I'll say that. So I'm going to bestow my knowledge and some of other stuff that we have gathered over time about soils for you guys.
I going back to the 92% you mentioned, was that 92%?
90. I think I said 98, but it may have been 92. Something, high percentage.
Yeah. So 90+%. I think generally there are a bunch of people that don't know that this thing even exists, and for those that do know that it exists, it's a problem solving technique. So if I don't feel like I have some problem that I can't solve otherwise,
right?
Why go for it? I mean, I think that, generally moving to some new area, we had a listener question, I think back last fall around, working up a new farm area that her and her family were living in. And that's an instance where, she had identified, I think, some problem areas with her soil. And I can get getting that kind of scenario tested. I'm going to rock with it, I think, until, the wheels fall off, which means vegetables aren't doing what they need to do.
You were part of the 92%, just so the world knows.
Damn it. You know how they say, would you like to would you like to answer this survey? And I'm like, I thought I said no.
Yeah, I was scrolling through it and I was like, son of a bitch, Batavia. At least you could be on my side. It's I agree with you completely though. And I think you have a great point. Like if it ain't broke, don't even try to fix it. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But, at some point too, I think it's good to have a baseline because what I was doing was just wrong. And it was interesting to see that, you know what I mean? It's interesting to be like, holy shit, like everything I've been adding is just, it's not good. It's not fixing it. And as a matter of fact, every step I took was leading to make the problems worse and worse. And there was like nothing that I could do to improve it, with literally nothing I could do to improve it.
See, I haven't figured out what to call it or how to describe it, other than to say there's something about my style of gardening where I just don't want to, I don't want the +1. I don't want to add a thing if I don't absolutely have to, right? So even when you talk about the things that you're adding, I'm saying to myself, well, shoot, whatever I got is what I got. Outside of compost, stay tuned for more on that. Yeah. Outside of compost, I just, and I'm not, this isn't an episode where it's due as Batavia recommends. This is really a conversation regarding, knowledge around soil and things that you should keep an eye out for. Because once you start, in my mind, you could end up in that trap of continuing to try to add and adjust and resolve. Now, granted, instead of going at it that way, get a soil test, and it's going to give you, as you'll reveal, specific directions on what you should be doing to improve upon it.
Right.
But I mean, I'm rolling with the good, better, best, man. So my soil may not be the best, but I think it's damn good.
Yeah. And I mean, there's key things. So first of all, it's important. I'm just about to read the soil test to you guys, but I want to just set it up like this. This garden here there was at the time of the testing, there was 4 raised beds and there's 2 wild garden beds. Okay. And the wild gardens are native soil, or virgin soil, if you want to say it like that. And they are 2 years old, but the 4 raised beds are the oldest. There was one that I started 1 year, and that one I believe is 4 years old. And then the other ones are 3 years old at this point. So it's important to note that they're different ages. And they had soil that I had brought in because it's a raised bed. So I had brought in perfectly engineered soil 3 years ago. And in that time frame, I did not add compost. What I did is I added more soil, which was to the detriment. And then another thing that I did is I added wood chips last year. Okay, so this is all going to factor into this. Okay, so it's kind of like breaking it down. Like as I look at it and I was reading what they said add, and I started breaking it down, I was like, oh no shit, I could see where the issue was kind of arising. Okay. So if I go through, and we're going to say this is the first one, is the perfect one where I brought in the soil and it's perfect pH. It's perfect amount of nutrients, the perfect ratio of compost to soil to sand for drainage and everything. It's engineered. The college here, the agricultural college, uses it in our state. So it's proven to be very good. So basically what you do is you go through and you take your sample and you dig down to a certain depth, and you just take random samples all the way across, send them in. They test it. And on this one, my pH was 7.1, so it's a little bit high, okay? But my phosphorus index is very high. I had a lot of phosphorus index. So the max is supposed to be 70, and I was at 82, okay? So that's pretty high. And then
So you're going to talk about how that kind of thing could happen, right?
Well, I'm going to talk about what I assume can happen, but you know what I mean? Like, there's not so much I can tell you. I'm just not a soil scientist. Yeah. And then my potassium now, this is key, is 22, and it's recommending is 50 to 70, so it was way low. Okay, now they don't test for nitrogen, and the reason why is because nitrogen's water soluble, so it can go out, okay? So I get this recommendation of... It tells you the fertilization rates to put in, okay? So usually what do we say on here for fertilizer? We put in like a 10, 10, 10, whatever.
Something that's even, yeah.
Right. So this one's saying put in an 8, 0, 24. So now you start getting into like, okay, you're trying to correct something.
Yeah.
Well, they don't make a fertilizer that's an 8, 0, 24 or a 16, 0, 48 or, any kind of numbers that would come to that. So then I had to create this shit.
And you're not a soil scientist.
Right. And it tells me too, and I'm sorry, it tells you 12 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Okay. Well, in this section, I have 128 square feet. So then you got to calculate that shit. So luckily I called my extension service and they're like, yeah, they told me how to calculate. And I was like, cool, no problem. And the other cool thing is he could look at it and say like, this soil was not from this area because it's not like what we have, this, that, and the other. So, but anyways, so then I did my calculations, I put in, and guess what happens? Things start growing a lot better. Surprising, isn't it?
Well, I mean, no. I'm trying not to be, the pessimist that like this isn't like the sugar peel effect, right? Like, you obviously notably had some issues, some deficiencies when it comes to the vegetables you were trying to grow last year. Right. You get this soil test. It points to deficiencies in the medium you're growing in, the soil, right?
Right.
You make adjustments, and I'm kind of like, you come out the next day like, look at this. Everything's green and lush. Like that's
No.
That's not what you're describing, but it kind of felt that way.
So I looked it up because I was like, okay, I'm going to add this soil, and how long before, or this fertilizer, how long before it affects it? And you start to see differences. And there was a range. And it was 2 to 5 weeks. Okay. So I was like, okay, 2 to 5 weeks, whatever. You know what I mean?
That's key, though. That's really key for 2 reasons. Minimally 2 reasons. One is the timing that you did it.
Right.
And you made adjustments. It wasn't in the full-fledged piece of, like, you weren't in the thrust of your garden season. So you really have 2 to 5 weeks to spare. But if you were in the midst of your garden season, while 2 to 5 weeks is a long time, it's not like I was expecting kind of in next year, this thing will resolve itself once you've made these adjustments. So It's good to hear that the remedy can be realized, if you will, much sooner than I thought.
Yeah. I mean, and it is about 2 weeks because it was still pretty warm. So, it was able to kind of kick in. And I did notice in about 2 weeks that things were growing more, a little bit greener, stuff like that. And that's probably a lot to do with the nitrogen because, at the time I'm growing mostly like greens and stuff like that. So the nitrogen affects it. But, you instantly saw, not instantly, but, in gardening, 2 weeks is instantly. I mean, let's be honest. You know what I mean? So the whole summer I'm adding 10, 10, 10 and I shouldn't be. So that means this year I need to be careful and not be putting in as much potassium. Because
wait, which number was give me the numbers and the way that they come across in the fertilizer bottle or package.
NPK.
Like give me your numbers. Yeah.
So
what were your numbers again?
That I'm supposed to add?
No, that you had.
Well, nitrogen is, we don't know. And then potassium or phosphorus is 82 and potassium was 22. Okay.
So phosphorus was high, potassium was low in your garden.
Right. Okay. So the potassium is for root development and phosphorus is for fruit development, I believe. Am I incorrect about that? I get confused now when I'm reading it. NPK, the K is potassium and the K is for roots. Yeah. So I was
that sounds right.
So technically, and I don't know if this is true because I don't have micrometer eyes to look into the soil, but my roots were not as strong, right? So that was interesting. Then we go to the wild garden.
Oh, now, okay.
What did I tell you about the wild garden all year that I knew I had a deficiency of?
I don't remember.
I had a calcium deficiency.
Okay.
Because I kept getting blossom
I
end
remember
rot,
the
right?
butternut squash. Yeah.
Okay. So I go through and I get that tested. Now, I get my phosphorus is 32. And my potassium is 15. So it's real super low. Okay.
Yeah.
So
that number was closer to like 50 or something. Supposed to be,
yeah, it's
right?
supposed to be. Both of those are supposed to be between 50 and 70. So it's super low, right? And my pH is 5.7, so it's acidic. Okay, so that's really important. Now, I didn't tell you the calcium or the other one because it didn't matter. You know, it's just kind of, unless you have an issue. But this one, I was convinced I had an issue of calcium. Yeah. My calcium was the same. It was perfect.
In the Wild Things Garden.
In the Wild Things Garden. But I was getting the blossom end rot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which you see on tomatoes, you saw on your butternut squash. Did you see it on watermelon too?
Everything. Everything would come in good, and then boom, just like that. It was like clockwork. I would get it. So I called the guy, and I was like, are you sure the test is right? And he's like, oh, yeah, that's right. Of course it's right. I tested it myself, young lad. And I was like, all right, so what's the deal? I was like, I kept getting, and I was like, I would spray calcium on it.
Yeah.
There was a calcium spray.
Okay.
There's a calcium spray that you spray on it, and it would correct it. And then it would come back, and I'd spray. And then I got to the point where I couldn't find it to buy anymore, and I just had to let things go. So I was talking to him, and he was like, it's because your pH is low. So he said your pH is what affects the uptake of the nutrients, and the calcium is directly affected by it. So it cannot get it. And I was like, son of a
It's not absorbing
bitch.
it in plain people's terms,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Oh,
So,
that's actually a killer, because it's you're taking these measures to right what you know is a wrong when it comes to the calcium deficiency.
right.
But there's this other thing lingering around, like, we won't let you be great, calcium. You know?
Like, you got plenty of it, but we ain't going to use it.
Yeah.
So I was like, fuck. So now I go to, and I add because it tells you, like, this is how much lime to add. So I go to get lime to put it in. Does not take effect for up to at least a year. Okay.
Because the lime it's the granules, right?
Yeah. I got this stuff that, I don't know. I can't remember the name of it now. Dolomite lime. I believe that's a little faster acting. Or
it's some movie from the 70s. You say Dolomite?
Oh, dude, have you seen the remake of that movie, by the way?
Yeah, I did.
That is an independent filmmaker's dream movie. So I'm going to watch it again now. But so I got like the lime recommendation. I added it. And I made the assumption that I was like, okay, this whole area is all planted in virgin. So I'm just going to add to the area. It can't hurt. You know what I mean? Because unless you're going like way over. So I was very like limited. So what this means though is I need to, like, next year, I need to follow up until I get the lime adjusted right. Because if you go over, it's really hard to get it to come down. Right? So I just decided to go in the era of caution, go a little bit. So.
Couple of questions.
Yeah.
So do you believe that was the soil you received for the regular garden, and then just the soil that was there for the Wild Things Garden? Or do you think the start of this was kind of what you were growing in those spaces that kind of led to the beginning or the initial depletion? I'm trying to, like, for the audience, I'm trying to get to an idea of, like, how close are we to where you are, or is your scenario super duper unique?
I can't tell you that. I know that, I had noticed from the get-go off the Wild Things Garden that was just going to kind of be an issue. And I knew that there was something there. So now you have to remember, for mine, I'm growing in spring, summer, and fall. And really in fall, I mean all winter. So basically my garden's active to an extent all year long. Yeah. So, that could have played an effect. But the other thing too is I didn't add compost last year at all. I just topped off with soil, which was a bad idea. So, and that was a conscious decision by me, because at the time I could not find bulk compost, and I can't go buy bags of compost to fill up my garden. That's insanity. You know what I mean? I'd be hundreds of dollars in just to kind of get a 1/4 inch across my garden. So, so I don't know the right answer to that. And it could be, watering, like, if your nitrogen's low, you could be too much drainage. You know what I mean? And that's the one thing for the Wild Things Garden is it's mostly sand. So there's a lot of drainage. So that's why I've gone back and I've added the compost. Now I finally got a source of compost. So I've added the compost now and put that in, and then just kind of letting that, just working the soil that way, and then the mulching and stuff like that will help as well. So, and the other thing too is in the regular raised bed gardens, I had all of those wood chips, and we've talked about this before, how they actually take the nitrogen out before they add it. So
As
that could have been another issue. So now, all of this being said, I still got stuff out of my garden last year, and I mean, my pantry's full of cans and stuff, but it wasn't as much, and I had
as productive as you wanted. Yeah,
and I had more issues, because weaker roots or weaker plants mean you're more susceptible to diseases and insects. So our gardens can't be as perfect as Batavia's all the time. So
clearly, yeah. Well, I mean, I think you have to get up past like 288 beds is when things start to level out, and it's like, White House and or Oprah's, orchard and or like it gets to that level.
Right.
And there may be problems, but there are a whole slew of people that basically are paid to manage them.
Right. It's important though, man. It's important to stay on top of that stuff. And I think, and I think you've been doing it unknowingly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people are.
I think there's also, and I try to weave this in when appropriate. For the last, I was doing the count because I didn't want to count on my hands. So this is the 14th season. This is the 14th year that we're in now that I will be gardening. So I've gardened 13 previous years in this space. And about half of that time, I've gardened in just the same, what do we figure out? 30 by 4 foot space. Mm-hmm. And since then, so if half of that time, so 6 years, let's call it, I've gardened in that same space. So since then, every space that I've gardened in has been like an extension or an expansion. So you, at the top of this, you talked about your 4 beds and the age of them. And that's actually played in my favor because the age of my garden beds differ wildly.
Right.
No pun intended. Which means that, again, the oldest one has been beat up the most, right? Has had to do the most work, if you will. Where some of these newer ones, even the whole front yard garden was installed in 2019.
Right.
So it's only been grown in for 2 years, right? And I've still even expanded that. So I said all of that to say, your brand new garden doesn't ensure you're going to have no deficiencies. But your chances are better, especially if you're getting soil from a good spot. I did have some container issues when it came to blossom end rot, and that was all fresh soil, fresh bag soil, potting soil and compost and peat moss, but still had some issues with it. And I mean, it came straight from the bag last spring.
Now, you know what I'm saying?
So nothing had been growing in it. I think it was what I was growing inside of it. I was growing tomatoes there. And they're heavy feeders. And I had thought to put some lime in it at the onset and said, because again, my style is let it go and see what happens. So if I would have added lime, I would have assumed if it was successful that I had to add lime going forward. And I didn't add lime and it wasn't as successful. So now I know, that mixture that I use. And it could be tweaking some things. I did a third, and a third, equal parts of all of those pieces. So I'm still...
When I do stuff in containers, I don't mix anything. I just put straight bag soil in. I don't do anything crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just never have. So it's interesting that you do.
Yeah, I didn't used to. This could be the influence of not so wise social media gardeners. I don't know. So historically, I would just, and I've grown food in containers over the years, even smaller containers. And I would just use bagged soil, bagged potting mix or potting soil or whatever. And this year, I think adding the compost is a good idea, but I think there was like me getting caught up on, proper drainage. It's just harder, to be quite frank, to grow in containers. The combination of what you're growing plus how big that container is, plus how warm or hot or damp your area is, all of that has to be folded in. So shout out to my container gardeners.
Yeah. I mean, and that, dude, You know, I like container gardening. I just don't like watering as much, but like I literally just dump a bag in there and grow. And the reason why I do that is because all of those numbers are usually balanced just right
in the bag. Yeah.
And once you start messing with that, then you start, you know, screwing it up, and then you're like, oh shit, you know, and it's like adding lime to a container would be the biggest pain in the ass because they give it to you in square footage.
Yeah.
You know, so you're like, oh yeah, I got like a 0.0001 square feet. Let's go ahead and break that down. You know, but it's interesting
I
that
may
you
do
do that.
something like that with you know, because I love a good garden experiment.
Yeah.
I may do like, you know, if I'm doing duplicates of something, straight potting soil, then a mixture in another container and see what happens.
Yeah.
Because I think there's absolutely something. I mean, it all fits into soil. It's absolutely something. One of the things that I noticed that I hear a lot, and again, more so from local gardeners, people that I actually know, there is a concept of digging, and how we say get a shovel and dig a hole, digging a hole and planting a plant. And my general reaction is, you know, you may want to build that up a bit and add some soil to it. And I don't know, maybe I've been fooled, right? You know, you go back to the idea of what you have isn't good enough, you know, so that the dirt that you've been growing your grass in, is it good enough? You know, my inclination is maybe not, but
right.
You know.
And see, and that, you know, the one last thing about soil tests and stuff like that is you can go, you know, you can get the ones that you put in the chemical and you shake.
Sure.
Don't
At the local
buy
hardware
those.
store.
They are dog shit. And I would, don't use that. Okay? Just don't. It's just, no. Nobody out there in the world don't use that. It's garbage. Like, no. Like, seriously, don't. Okay? Because, and you know, you joke, but so what happened with me is, I knew that I had polar opposites. I had one bed that wasn't and one bed that was high in lime. And I had mixed up my soil samples.
I remember,
So I was like, fuck, what do I do? You know, it took me weeks to get this. And so I got a test and I tested both and they both came out the same. And so then I took it out and I tested both and they both came out the same. And then I tested both and they both came out the same. I was like, and finally I got barely a different color. Barely. But I was able to look at it and be like, okay, this is clearly a lower pH. And that's how I was able to deduce which one is which. But it was nowhere even close. Like, otherwise it would be unusable. I would have no clue how much lime to add. Yeah. And I mean, to have these recommendations, you know, it's like that wild garden one, you know, I didn't even tell you so my beds wanted 8.024 and my wild garden wanted 6.618. So to get those recommendations is
real
huge,
finite,
because you can really like make an educated decision, you know. And so what I'm doing this year is I'm gonna get my test again in the fall, but what I'm gonna do throughout the summer is I'm gonna keep them, like, I'll still use a 10-10-10, but then I might add a little bit of that potassium, you know, and add a little bit more nitrogen in and stuff like that, just to kind of try and balance that out a bit. You see what I'm saying? So I think that, you know, I have an educated guess in my mind at this point. Like, I by no means have it figured out.
We're all saying a garden prayer, hoping that we don't run into bins, you know, wild things, composite of a garden.
Hey, you never know.
It's a pain in the ass, man.
It is. But it's interesting. And I mean, things still grew last year. I just had issues. So, and I mean, I'll just keep fertilizing and doing what I'm doing. And, you know, I've gone through and I've added 3 inches of compost around. So were there any vegetables you could have planted to aid in what you're trying to resolve here? You know, there may have been cover crops and stuff like that, but I think the biggest thing to avoid this issue goes back to using mulch and compost regularly. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think that's the biggest thing that you can do. And you know that I've never really been a big fan of mulch, and I still don't think it's 100%. I think compost is 100%. Like, you have to use it. And I've always used compost to an extent, but, you know, to really go back and correct, I think is really what I needed to do. So I think that's going to be the biggest part, because one, it doesn't have as much sand as the soil does, so it'll help with that drainage, and it'll lock up those nutrients a little bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah, so. I think there definitely is that component of drainage and kind of the good stuff just sliding on out.
Yeah.
And
you have it bad in your, you could have it worse in your garden, right? Because it's on that concrete.
I think for the backyard, half of the garden is sitting in a space that is ripe for all of the nutrients. And when I say all, I'm being a little bit extreme, but nutrients draining out. Right. Like I literally see it, Right. So, I think that there's some lessons I know from watering indoor houseplants that I could apply to watering those beds that could help a little bit. But that kind of feeds into how many more hours am I outside watering, you know? So the gift is that I'm able to get food from those beds. The curse is it's a little bit more upkeep, if you will. So if I did a cost analysis for the backyard garden concrete beds, it'd be higher than the other ones,
Yeah.
More expensive, if you will.
Because you just add potting soil and like bag potting soil?
Bag garden soil. So the only place I use potting soil or mixes in containers. Okay. But yeah, bagged garden soil for many years, and then now bagged garden soil and bagged compost. So for my area,
how much bagged garden soil do you add every year?
I'd probably say I spend maybe $15 on a garden bed a year, and that's probably at the high price of the soil. So the soil now is like 50% off of the price I normally pay. So I used to pay like $7 a bag. And then I'd pay like $3 a bag for compost. So 7 for soil, 3 for compost. So that's 10 a year. And then if I say maybe I add another half a bag or something, now it's much, much cheaper. But yeah, that's, about 1 bag of compost and 1 to 2 bags of compost and 1 bag of soil.
You just put that right on top.
Beds. Most times I work up the beds because I like it. Okay. So I'll put it on top, and then there are some beds that are much older. Right at this stage, beds are like either 2 years old, 3 years old, or like 6 or 7 years old. So that one, you can see the difference in the soil makeup. So I'll really try to work in that new soil and that compost.
Yeah. See, I'm trying to go no dig, so I'm trying not to like till, stuff like that. That's why I was curious, like you just, cause it's, doesn't sound cheaper, but it is cheaper the way you do it, because every year you're adding a little bit here and there, a little bit. You know what I mean? Yeah. Versus like, oh shit, I got a problem. Let's fix it. You know what I mean? Because that's the thing, is these problems don't arise overnight. It's like a slow burn process.
Yeah. And if you check out my Instagram, and if you've ever seen me with a truck full of bagged soil, this is why.
Yeah.
It's
so not just because you're some fucking psycho lady is like, I love soil so much that I'm going to hoard it. You are using it.
Well, I'm not sure if I can really deny that. I do have a tendency to say,
and it goes
I need one thing, but I'm going to buy 5 things. Yeah.
You had me nervous for a second. You looked at me and I was like, oh shit.
No, but yeah, it's exactly that. And I generally don't do, especially now, because the bags are like $3.50 or something. And I know for people that don't pay for soil at all, I know they're like $3.50. It's kind of like, if you, I don't know, you guys, you pay for water, right? Like water from, So, but there are places that you don't. And like when you talk about like, oh, my water bill, like, wait, what? So yeah, the charge for soil, real tangent. I got a gift card from Home Depot for the holidays from a friend, and I'm all like, I need to wait and buy something really special with it, and it's like, Dad, should I use it to buy dirt? Like, that's pretty special.
It really is. And even though I've added, like, I've topped off my bed, so I've mulched them, I composted them, and no mixing, just composted on top, and then I'm going to plant and mulch again. I'm thinking that I might just go out and buy some bags of garden soil, like one big one for each bed, and just say I'll have them for next year, and kind of store them, because I think it's really important to do that. And it's amazing what just that little bag of compost will do for your bed every year. You know?
Yeah, I mean, your plants will love you for it.
Yeah.
That I've learned, right? And
Yeah.
I think that just as a note, one of the things that that I started off with adding the soil. I'm trying to balance because compost is a whole different thing. Was adding the soil just because of the compression when it came to, you know, how compressed the soil would get in the regular in-ground bed. So they're raised beds, but they're sitting on native soil, or they were at one point. That's the oldest garden beds in my garden, front or backyard. And then the other beds, it just became, okay, I have 2/3 of soil left in this new season compared to what I had last season. And those beds aren't high to begin with. So there's soil and then concrete. So there's not a whole lot of growing space there. So I was going to try to top those beds off. And it just became a habit, you know, you know how we are about routine sometimes. So like you said, it was unconscious. I didn't realize, you know, that I was doing good things for the things that I would plant there.
No. So. And it's the same thing that I would do in my last garden is every year I would just drop some compost in, you know, just throw a bag on top, you know, never had an issue ever. You know what I mean? But it was every year we did it. And that's kind of like, I think it's one of those things where people know the good practices and they do them, and then we really don't have to worry about it. But, you know, it's like, I mean, I remember clearly last year being like, I need to get compost. I'm like, no, I'm all right. I'm going to put some more of this dirt on there. I'm good. Yeah. You know what I mean? I remember clearly thinking that. And it just didn't, you know.
Like, what's it going to hurt, right?
Yeah, it's just 1 year. What's it going to hurt? But then the reality is like, you know, that garden is getting stressed every year. It's more and more and more and more. And so it's very important to kind of keep up with that. So I find it fascinating that you have basically never had an issue, and it's because
stumbled into it.
Well, I mean, again,
so just to clarify, I've generally, and I've not measured it year to year to year. So when I talk about this is my last year was the biggest garden ever, my biggest harvest ever. I mean, it's just square footage. It's the biggest space ever, right? Yeah. So I don't remember how many tomatoes I used to get, you know, when I only gardened in that 30 by 4 foot space. But what I do know is I can distinctly remember one of the newer garden beds. It was sitting about 2 feet tall. So it was like 2 feet tall, still 7 by 4 feet as far as length and width. And I thought it was one of the, I probably built some garden beds before then, but it was one of the garden beds that I had built. I was very proud of it. It was like fresh, you know, wood. You know how wood looks. It's real pretty that first year, right? And I had all of my little plants. I had my little square foot garden, you know, ties off. And I was just watching those plants do nothing. You know, I think there were pepper plants, maybe even a tomato plant there. So again, this is on a concrete patio. And I was talking to a good girlfriend of mine who dabbles in gardening. And she's like, well, what kind of compost do you use? And I'm like, again, you know, my mindset, there's dirt and there's a vegetable plant. That should be all I need. And so she recommended the compost that I use now. And
which is?
It's Moonure. Did you know the name of it? And you know I would have to say it like that.
No.
MOO-NURE. It's a brand that I've only seen at Home Depot.
I use Black Cow, and when I lived up north, I used Gulf of Maine.
I've seen Black Cow at some of the nurseries, and it's expensive here in comparison to the Moonure. There's also a mushroom version that looks very similar, and when it comes to the packaging that I see at the big box, you know, home improvement stores.
Yeah, I'm interested about mushrooms. Next week we're going to be talking about compost, and we're going to have somebody on talking about it, and it's going to be interesting because he's doing mushroom compost right now. He just went and picked up like 500 pounds of like mushroom substrate. So I'm very curious about it.
And maybe it all comes in time because remember, I was rejecting her idea. So this is probably 2017 or something. I was rejecting her idea of like, I was like, really? Do I really have to? So I wonder if maybe 2-3 years from now we'll be talking and I'll be like, absolutely add fertilizer. You know, maybe just again, it takes me a long time to embrace it because I am team compost. Yeah. You know, like I believe in it.
There's a strong argument that says add compost. No need for fertilizer.
Yeah.
And I am a strong advocate of both personally. You know, I think it comes down to cost and what your results are and what you're looking for, but I don't see an issue with it. at all, you know. And like I've told you before, if you're relying on your fertilizer, then you're just putting a Band-Aid on, you know, on, you know, you've cut off your arm and you're trying to plug it with a Band-Aid. It's just not going to work.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe that all gardens need fertilizer, or do you believe fertilizer is a remedy for some deficiency?
So I believe that fertilizer is a remedy, but I also believe that it is the protein powder that you give a bodybuilder. You know, I believe that like your garden's going, you're like, boom, give it that extra boost, give it that extra boost.
I know you all have been waiting. It's like we're 40 minutes into the episode. Is none of this bell worthy?
I've said
Absolutely
3 things
is.
that were bell worthy. I'm like, Batavia's hand's broken, but I think that's really what it is. You know, it's the steroids. You know, kind of. And I think there's like I use the Neptune's fish fertilizer, and I always have, and I always will, and there's nobody that will ever talk me out of it because I just have always done it, and that feeds at a microbial level. Yeah, that doesn't even add a lot, but it just adds enough to where I'm like, I fucking want to do it. You know, like
one of the lessons that I saw quickly, and it's connected. So I was growing squash last year in containers, which I think I've only grown squash in raised beds before. And these were about 16, 17 gallon containers. So for all intents and purposes, it's not like the 5 gallon bucket challenge or anything like that. It's sizable compared to what you see a lot of people grow food in. And things would take off, whether it was a transplant or whether I direct sow, things looked good until that plant got sizable. And I would watch, if it wasn't daily, it was every other day watering. I would watch the leaves turn yellow. I'd kick in some fertilizer, and guess what would happen? It's green like a Christmas tree, and it's something to be able to see, that correction, that course correction, if you will.
Now, what fertilizer were you throwing on it?
I believe it would be the blue bottle of Neptune's Harvest.
So it was the fish seaweed fertilizer from Neptune. Mm-hmm. So, because Batavia was not, I remember last year, Batavia was like, you're going to have to talk about it because I don't really use fertilizer. And, she's like, what do I do? And I'm like, just water with it, and it's crazy. Like and I'm not trying to do a product endorsement necessarily, but, I think for anything, even like your water soluble fertilizers that are not, that your synthetic ones, you're going to see a difference with all of them. And it's crazy to watch that turn around like that. And it says something to you though. You know what I mean? Like it makes you think.
Well, there are a couple of things. There's a laziness though, and not to take a right turn to fertilizing, but I remember a couple of years ago with my hibiscus, it's my number 1 favorite flower. I said it. All right. It's been said.
It's not the first time. Why you act like you're coming out?
Oh, because I always say like my top 3 or top 5 because I don't want to make a difference in my flower babies. So I was at a nursery and just these lush, big, beautiful blooms, like a dozen blooms on a plant, right? And those basically bloom, and then that next day, overnight, that thing shrivels up. But the idea is that there are more blooms to take its place,
right? And
so I was asking one of the associates, like, what am I doing wrong? Like I would get at that point 2 blooms, maybe. And she's like, it's missing something. It needs something. It needs food. Right. And so I knew then when she said, if you feel like it answers the thing that you want, like it gives you the answer you want, when she said you could get more blooms, it would more consistently bloom if you were feeding it. It doesn't have what it needs. Then I was like, watching the leaves turn from yellow to green again for the zucchini plant, after being fed with fertilizer, like that's telling. Now what I do is, and because I had already bought it, I use just a regular, like a Miracle Grow fertilizer, like on my flowers. Yeah. And I use the Neptune's Harvest fertilizer because we're also balancing price and cost and all of that. And I'll use that on my vegetables. The only place I didn't use it last year was my collard greens, which is so funny because they kicked ass last year. But
collard greens are like tough though. But like,
man,
my flowers and pots, and even in like my flower beds, like I don't use nothing organic on them. I mean, straight up, like, I will if I have it, but I put a slow release pellet fertilizer in there, so I don't even have to worry about it. And then every once in a while, like if I have a little bit left over in my can, I'll pour some Neptunes in there. But I mean, and I wish I could. It's just, it does come down to cost.
Yeah.
You know, it really doesn't. It's like, okay, what do I want to nourish more? And it's not really nourishing. It's like, I want to focus more in organic on my vegetables than I do on my petunias.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, generally, you're still not putting anything toxic on it. So you think, oh, what about the bees, right? Yeah. And it's still not, you're putting anything toxic. But when it comes to my dollar for dollar, you know, if I'm going to use some organic mixture, it's going to be on the thing that I plan on eating. So.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just kind of a no-brainer in my mind. But, you know, some people don't. And I mean, I know that like Neptunes and a lot of these places, they all have like flower, you know, formulas and stuff like that. But you know, the bigger my garden gets, the more expensive that shit gets too. And it's like, you know, I'm going through about 2 gallons a year of the Neptune's fish fertilizer. And so that's not cheap. You know what I mean? And I try and do it every 2 weeks. I try and go out there and I do. How do you use it?
I add it to a water can.
So you water the ground?
Yeah, I water the soil.
Okay, see, I water the leaves with it. I feed the leaves.
Yeah, which I know it's a part of the recommendation as well.
Yeah, I do it.
But I'm out here like, shoot, I'm trying to get directly to the source. I don't have that Neptune's harvest money to spend on the leaves. But you know what? I did do it when I had like when I saw my cucumber plant starting to falter. I would water the leaves in that instance. But things that looked healthy, like all of my pepper plants last year, I would just go straight to the soil. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it kind of is what it is. You know, I got a big, I bought a big sprayer, like a gallon sprayer this year. That I had a handheld one, like a little, you know, and I got a big gallon one to carry around. I mean, I pulled it out the other day because I was, I still have to spray my greenhouse with Neptunes. So I mixed up a batch, tried it for the first time, and my son had some of his friends over, and they were playing in the woods. And they go, oh my gosh, he's got some kind of dangerous chemical in there. And I'm like, no, it's just rotten fish. And you know, it's just, it smells bad, but it's the look of it makes you think that it's something terrible in there. But and I got that because, you know, a lot of times I want to spray under the leaves, but I can't get up under there and I don't want to crawl. So it kind of helps to spray and it gives a fine mist to help foliar feed the plants. So
I wanted more of a spray, but you know, at some point after the third Google search and third set of reviews that are bad on something, I just give up. I'm just like, all right, I'll just go ahead back to the watering can.
No, so dude, go on Amazon. I got mine for $12 for a gallon. I was shocked at how cheap it was. You just got to take care of it. You know what I mean? They're kind of temperamental, but you know, it is what it is. But see, I can mix all my other stuff in there and spray too, because I spray with neem oil and BT and stuff like that. I kind of have a routine of spraying for that. So it kind of helps me to keep up with it. And the easier it makes it, the better, more I use it, and the better off I am overall. So kind of works that way.
I think that's just one more example of feeding the soil. I love the protein powder for the, you know, the bodybuilder.
If you want to stick on that for a second, you don't have, if you're a bodybuilder, you don't have to drink protein. You could eat
8 heads of lettuce. Sorry.
Fuck you. You can eat more protein.
So for the record, hold on. That was an assault, not on me by him, but on me or by me to him. If you all heard the healthy living, you know, gardening for a healthy lifestyle episode. Was that the episode?
Yeah.
I'm pretty,
no, I don't know what episode it was now.
Or the one before that where, he's full of shit. I called him on it, and I think I may continue here and there. So
eat it. But, you know, in that same analogy, feeding the soil would be just eating more protein for a bodybuilder, you know, just like natural foods and stuff like that. So, and I think if you do that, you're setting yourself up to win, you know? And I think that's the kind of key for us and what you've been doing all these years. And it's so funny because I think, the 98% of people that answer that question, they're probably naturally doing it. And they don't even realize that they're amending their soils and they're helping out and stuff like that. So
yeah,
you don't want to get into an over fertilization situation.
And I think that also it just comes with time, so your first garden today, the way that you maintain it will likely be different 5 years from now.
Yeah.
You'll pick up some tricks and some tips along the way. You'll make adjustments. I think it's really important to note, that's such a cool mug, man. That's not what I wanted to note, but yeah. How many ounces is that?
I don't know.
I'm a big fan of a mug. Yeah, I love some mugs, but
it's a travel mug, but these podcasts go so long that it gets cold, so...
This is true. This is one of my favorites, but it's so itty bitty, and I'm just like, this little bitty munchkin kind of.
Like if you weren't on camera right now, you'd probably be sticking your tongue in the bottom of it, trying to get that last little bit
trying
out.
To get to the bottom of it. Was it the other day we were talking? I'm stirring it with my finger. So anyway, where was I? The thing to note. I firmly believe that the gardener today, 2021. Their garden will be different in 2031. And very likely there will be either different and or more vegetables. And all of that feeds into the controller of the bell, feeds into what you need to do to maintain your garden, right?
Yeah.
So that very first year when I planted with my grandparents, well, that would have been 2008, tomatoes, I probably had one tomato plant, a couple of cucumber plants and a couple of, bell pepper plants. Like, what did I really need? I don't even remember if I bought soil, to be quite frank. So the reality is I cleaned up the weeds and raked up the leaves and probably just put those starter plants I got from Home Depot right into the ground. But as the years have turned, I've, changed a lot as far as my garden style, found a garden style. How about that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that this is informative for me because it's a reminder of, as we get from where we are now into the season, there's a cause and effect for all of this, so it's not that I don't have a green thumb when, my plants don't produce many flowers or don't produce many, much fruit. There's a cost to this. And it gives me another reminder of going back to say, you're now on year 10 for that garden bed on the patio. That, although you've been adding soil to it, is it really getting all that it needs? Especially because, again, I'm moving towards some heavy feeders too this season. I'm going to be putting in some of these beds.
Yeah. And the heavy feeders thing is an issue. And, the one thing to think about in this garden, I have rotated my tomatoes around every single bed since it started, and they are known as heavy feeders. And tomatoes are a big part of what we all grow. Yeah. So,
let me take a moment to speak on that, though, which is pretty interesting. And Lord knows I don't want to jinx myself. But remember I said this would be the 14th year. So this would be the 14th year I've grown tomatoes in essentially the same place. Yeah. So, there's that middle of the cage, maybe that middle space is the space that I've been pretty consistently grown tomatoes. And while I've tried them here and there in other spots and pockets of the garden, that's the same space. And one of the reasons why I kind of, low key rejected crop rotation was like, I haven't had any problems. Tomatoes always grow right there. But the reality is that, I am slightly amending my soil
you're adding
every
soil
year.
every year, and that may have a lot to do with it too, that you're physically adding new soil every year. I don't think so first of all, I agree with you and I disagree with you on crop rotation, and I don't really want to have turn this into a crop rotation discussion.
I think we have that on the schedule. Oh, and I'm so looking forward to it. Yeah, you heard that. That was a full-on sigh.
The whole thing, though, is it's all about feeding. It's all about replenishing. It's all about amending that soil. And
also disease, right? That feeds into it as well.
Yeah, having weak plants from weak soil leads to strong disease. And that's, it's just like anybody else. If you're nutrient deficient yourself, you're fitting to get sick. I got to pause.
Yeah, you got to pause. I mean, I'm all bundled up here. I'm wrapping my arms around myself trying to keep warm, and you're dropping those gems, man. I'm trying to get my hand in there for the buzzer.
So, I mean, it's the same idea, and it's weird though, because, you know, as a human, it's hard to think about it that way, because I'm like, what am I supposed to give it, a hamburger? You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean this blood meal works, or this potash works? You know, all of those weird, you know, additives that Epsoma uses, because that's all a part of it, you know. And I've said it before and I say it again, you know, the organic ones that have to compost are going to be your best bets, because they will continue to feed longevity wise. So that being said, use whatever the hell you want. You know, who am I to tell
I mean,
you?
I think that it's just like a part of this is just like cooking. Yeah. You know, some folks look at meals and say, well, it isn't spaghetti unless you add this. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine about how the difference in like things like cornbread, macaroni and cheese, and dressing, or, you know, we call it dressing. And we used to eat Jiffy cornbread all the time. My grandmother used to put it in a casserole dish or even a cast iron skillet. It used to come out of the oven like, you know, it's homemade. And I was really old before I realized like so many people eat hot water cornbread, you know, so cornbread with cornmeal, right? And folks judge, right? Like, oh, well, no, that's not, because it tastes completely different. But people get used to making a certain thing a certain way. Could my grandmother cook with hot water cornbread? Sure, she could, but her preference was to mix up the Jiffy mix. So there are people, when you mention blood meal, that made me think of it. There are people that have a recipe for their garden. This is how they are feeding their garden. I've seen people online that move from one area to another, and they have all of these additives and amendments, and they're doing the same routine. Now, one could argue if that routine was really about feeding that particular place, you wouldn't necessarily duplicate that when you go to the next place. No, it's just a thing that they believe yields stronger plants, healthier plants, and that's something they carry forward with them from garden to garden.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been thinking about too, is that I need to come up with a routine of some sort, you know, a good measure routine, you know, add a little bit of this and add a little bit of that, and just kind of, you know, even it out. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think that, you know, in different times of the year, you know, different crops they have different requirements. Yeah. And so like right now, for example, in spring, everything's going to be a little bit more nitrogen heavy, because that's what produces the green. So, you know,
that's a lot of what we're growing in the spring. Yeah.
It is. It's a lot of what we're growing in the spring. And then, you know, in the summer, everything requires a little bit more potassium and, you know, all that stuff. And like your perennials, you know, fruit. For years, I've been adding potassium to them in the fall or, you know, real late summer, early fall, because it builds the roots so they can live longer, you know, be stronger for the winter. So that's all part of it. And I think just, you know, maybe you don't have a routine, maybe you do, but either way, it helps. But
there's enough information out there to help you determine what makes sense for your routine, and then what your formula is. By the way, I was looking up your seed starting mix formula.
Oh yeah, and
yeah. Well, there may have been a component that was purchased recently in order to make up that mix. Kicking
for you?
And screaming. Yeah.
What was the component?
Vermiculite. I bought. Yeah. That's the only thing I didn't have on hand already.
I know. It's kind of that's the more expensive one, but I feel like that's the crucial one.
Yeah.
Hey, my seedlings are doing good.
Yeah, good on you.
My broccoli and cauliflowers are about 5 to 6 inches high now. So they're getting ready. Get ready to go. Good. It
won't be long.
Before we move on to the next segment, I just want to give you a little hint, a little tip, a little surprise. Not a tip, surprise.
Oh, come on. Which one is it now? I'm
trying to get excited. My flower seedlings are growing.
Oh, that is so freaking awesome.
Like a massive success. Like, I'm pretty happy.
Yeah. What'd you start again?
What did I start?
What didn't you start, huh?
Yarrow, snapdragons, salvia, a lot of all those. Black and white dianthus They all
I remember
came,
you saying you liked them last year.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get the black and white until this year, which is not really black. It's like a deep, deep, deep purple. Just for the record, it's not black. Like you put sunlight on it.
I mean, I knew it couldn't have been, but yeah.
Yeah, it can't be. So, Lupin, I think.
That's a new series on Netflix, just so you know.
What?
Lupin. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah. It's one of those what do they call them? Heist shows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
These flowers aren't heist.
Yeah.
So, and then there's some others I can't remember, but I was a little upset because I have to do it in waves now.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna ask, yeah.
Because a lot of these were like 20 days to germination. And so I was like, well, I'll start them now. And then like 5 days later, I'm like, shit, they're all growing. So I'll just be and I totally anticipated potting them up and getting them big before I put them out. So it'll be cool. But
I mean, that's going to be
buy perennials small, in little
I was going to say
packs.
that's a great use of the greenhouse, though.
Yeah.
When it comes to you getting to the next stage, maybe, a few weeks from now, you can go ahead and start moving some of those that you potted up to the greenhouse, because space is going to be it's always going to be an issue,
Yeah, so that level of my seed starting station at this point, the lights are staying on 24 hours a day for the next 3 to 4 days, because everything's kind of popping separately. So I'm trying to be careful of that. But those seedling mats, I've never used them before. They definitely do speed up germination.
Okay.
I can, I've had all kinds of stuff, like it cuts it in half.
That's a garden extra for me. I was actually looking at I bought some more of the domes, so the seed tray, and then they have the plastic dome, and they only let that plant get so tall. It's like maybe 2 inches or whatever. But I was looking and I saw the seed, the heat mat, and it was like $22, and I was like, yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, I got two
because
for
I've
22.
had some pretty, Chicago prices. I've had some pretty good luck with germination. Now, again, it differs per plant, per vegetable, per, flower, and so on. So at the onset, because I have some things that, are doing pretty well. There's some others that we'll talk about at a later date. But germination hasn't been an issue.
Amazon, they were cheap. It was like after I saw them and I got them and I've used them, I'm like, damn, because I've never used them before, and almost 100% germination rate and almost 100% faster. So
yeah,
and the trick is you only use them until they germinate and then you take it away. So I only have 2 mats, but I have multiple flats going. So as soon as one pops, I just switch them around and. It seems to work out pretty good, but I definitely am a fan of them. Bridget at San Diego Seed Company, when she talked me into it last year, I was like, all right, fine. And I'm glad I wouldn't buy more than 2 though. It's just kind of, you could start seeds without it, but.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few folks use them. I'm actually keeping my eye on it because you're all, get always ready to kick into maintenance mode or problem solving mode. My basement is pretty warm.
Yeah.
And probably warmer than the seedlings would really want. So I'm keeping an eye on that, when it comes to some of these things that are going to be down there for a good while. But it's the balance. That's where my furnace is. And I've closed all of the vents that I can. And I just, I like to be warm in my house.
But you might not need it, because if it's warm down there, you just you might be getting the benefit of,
Yeah. Between
most
that
people
and
don't have that.
In the dome, I think I'm getting kind of that,
What's the temperature down there?
I don't know. I don't have a thermostat down there.
You don't have a thermometer?
Don't I get that mixed up every time, don't I?
Yeah, you could get a $5 thermometer and put down there.
Yeah, I have one in the garage that I could take down there. But again, I've not done that. I'd probably say easily 75, 76 degrees.
Yeah, that's what, because the heat mat, I believe, goes 10 to 20 over the ambient temperature, supposedly. So that you're definitely, so you don't even need it. Congratulations, lucky
Thank
ass.
You I'm stumbling into stuff left and right. But let me tell you about my electricity bill.
Yeah, that's a painful thing.
Yeah, actually, I've been monitoring, just as a quick note when we come back. I just want to drop that note. when it comes to cost and all.
Well, you started talking about food earlier and made me hungry. So
always,
it's time for somebody, I don't even know who, to give you the recipe of the day. Was there something that I had said that I was going to give you a recipe for soon? I can't remember.
Well, for sure, it's either a soup or a stew, but I still think it's a part of your being stingy.
Me being stingy?
Yeah, with the recipes. Yeah.
That's
Wasn't
rude.
it the unchicken noodle soup that you were going to give?
I gave that.
Did you?
Yeah, I gave that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had the cumin in it, remember?
Oh, yeah, because it's clutch. I remember that.
Yeah, it is clutch. Yeah. Yeah, so I can keep on with this soup thing. I have this soup that I call trash soup. Mm-hmm. And I took it to, we had a dinner at our church one time, and they were like, what kind of soup is this good? I was like, oh, it's trash soup. And they're like, oh. And they all put it down. They're like, great. But it's just that because it's like everything is kind of like left over as far as vegetables go. And I usually cook it this time of year because I use the corn or the green bean, carrot, and pea kind of mixture, the succotash mixture. You get the frozen section. Mm-hmm. So you start with a bag of that. But it's an onion sauteed. And then it's a bag of that. And then it's literally whatever other vegetable you have. But it's always a green goes into it. Okay. So we're adding kale. You can add spinach. You can add anything. I wouldn't add lettuce because it just isn't good. Yeah. But the key when you're doing kale or collards or anything for this is you put it in the beginning and cook it with everything. Like once you start the actual boiling process of the soup. Yeah. So what I do is I saute the onion, and then I add the vegetables just to kind of get them to break up a little bit. And then I add your broth, whatever kind of broth you want to use. I don't care. You put in about 6 cups of that, and then a can of diced tomatoes that you've canned, hopefully. But you add that, and then you add a grain of some sort. So I use barley a lot of the time. And then it's a can of beans as well. Oh, okay. Wait. So, like not string beans or? No, like beans. Like, okay. A lot of times we'll use kidney beans, but pick your bean, whatever you feel like eating. If it's a black bean, I would drain them. Well, I drain and rinse all my beans. So drain and rinse them, add them, and then you put in your kale or whatever, and you just want to make sure it cooks down good. And then I add salt, pepper, garlic, cayenne pepper, just a little bit of cayenne just to give a little kick. And then just kind of mix it together, cook it for about, you bring it to a boil, then you simmer it for about 20 to 30 minutes whenever everything's done. Then at the end, I add basil. So to the bowl as you eat it, you add the basil. Okay. You don't cook it in there. You put it in the bowl as you eat it, and as much as and more the better. But and I actually got that from... This is dried basil at this time of year, though, right? Well, fresh basil if you have it, yeah. Yeah, okay. So a lot of people, and basil is actually a good one you can grow inside too. So you can definitely use it. But dried basil if that's all you have. Fresh basil is better, always better. And I got that from Panera Bread. Oh, okay. They always had a soup, and I was like, man, I really like the soup. And it was just the basil they put on top. So I was like, yeah, they always put it like right in the middle. And then when you mix it up, you know how it doesn't really mix up well. And I'm like, it's good. But I noticed like as I got halfway through, I'm like, I don't like this anymore. So it was literally just all of the basil. All the basil was gone. So that's really the key behind it. But it's a really hearty, filling soup, and it gets rid of a lot of like extra vegetables, stuff like that. I've added mushrooms, peppers, just all kinds of stuff, and adjust as you need. If you like, peppers can go kind of weird with some stuff, so just be careful and get creative with it. But it's basically a trash soup. So yeah, I'm a big fan. I had joked with some friends around like
this may not be your experience, but, you have all of the good intentions on, eating, healthy and making good decisions. And then you have all these vegetables in your, vegetable bin. And it's like, picture the zombie. I've seen this meme. The zombie looking back at you is the vegetables that are dying in your bin as you order takeout, So it's nice to be able to, if you're not composting like Batavia isn't, and this is a good way to say, hold on, these are still good. Let me in turn fold this into a soup. And it seems pretty easy to cook too. You had me at diced tomatoes because I'm looking for all kinds of ways to use, the things that I can.
Or diced tomatoes go in almost every soup. So, it's actually hard for me to find a good soup that doesn't call for a can of diced tomatoes to start.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's, and I just try to cook easy, man. And it doesn't have to be crazy. It's sometimes it's fun too, because sometimes it can get kind of funky, and sometimes you'll want to be like, "Damn, that was good." It's never the same. But if you use those basics, the onion, the frozen vegetables, and then the seasonings and stuff as a base, and the greens, then you're good. And anything else you add in on top of that, like I like to put the mushrooms in because it gives it that meady flavor,
texture.
If you eat meat, for sure, add the meat in there. Chicken, beef, whatever. So it doesn't matter. I put fish in there once. It wasn't very good.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and that was because of the beans.
Yeah.
The beans and the grains didn't do good, but I love boiled fish. Yeah.
Have you guys ever frozen that soup that you just garbage trash soup?
Yeah. Okay, also cabbage is really good in it.
Oh, I could definitely see that.
Cabbage is really effing good in it.
Yeah.
And it makes you have good gas, so it's awesome to have. So, cabbage is,
now you have me,
Yeah, cabbage, it slipped my mind, but cabbage is really good in it, so.
Okay, yeah, it's a good.
And you got to cook the shit out of it when you put it in there, though. You don't really want it to have like, a lot of like body to it. You want to really cook it down.
Well, that's why I assume you said put those greens in at the beginning because you do want it to be okay.
Yeah, I find usually with soups, anytime I put a green in, I put them in real early, and that's why. When I was living in New England, the Portuguese, when I would go on the Portuguese boats, they would have their soup. I don't even remember the name of it, but it was kale soup, and they would always put the kale in like in the very beginning. And it makes it basically so it's a palatable soup, because otherwise you're like chewing the crap out of this kale. And as a soup, you don't want that. So
yeah, if you think about every soup that you buy, whether it's canned, if you're doing that, whether it's at a restaurant, like you rarely have chunks of leafy greens in there, So well, there's something to that.
Because that Portuguese soup is mostly kale. It's kale and chorizo in it, and it's really good, really, really good. But that kale it doesn't have that big body to it. So
okay, I can dig it. You know what? You are actually convincing me that you may be some soup connoisseur.
I am.
I said you may be. Possibly asterisk around it.
Hey, you know what? You're entitled for that, but I can keep throwing soup recipes. I thoroughly enjoy, and as a vegetarian and as a vegan for a number of years, soups are what got us through, especially living up north in the cold. We try to make one soup a week at minimum.
And it's really good for a family as well, right? That's a thing that goes a long way. You can make it go as long as you want. That's why I asked about it freezing it too.
Dude, if you have kids, all you do is you take the cabbage and slice it really thin, which kind of defeats the purpose. But then get like alphabet noodles and put it in there. And you got alphabet soup. It's like, it's kind of a no-brainer. So. We do all that stuff. We did alphabet soup, but it pissed David off, so we don't do it anymore. He's like, I can't spell anything in it. I'm done.
Cutest thing.
Yeah.
All right. So I did have one note, and at this part of the year, if you're interested in this, so this may not apply to everyone, I don't know. Do we talk about it a lot? Like the expense of gardening? And I know that, there's some people that are gardening for health reasons. There are other people that are gardening because it's healing to the soul. There's some folks that are gardening to balance budget, right? And some folks that are gardening for all of those reasons. Starting seeds indoors, I did have a slight concern about quite literally how much it would increase my electricity bill, because the way that I started out was like towers, so 2 shelving units of lights that are on 16 hours a day, which would never have been on. Electricity would not have been piping through, those outlets under normal circumstances. So I did, it's not a scientific study, but I did look back at my January 2021 light bill, which it doesn't have 2 shelving units lit yet, but it's getting there. And then I looked back at 2020 when I first started seeds. And this is the key. I went back and looked at 2019, which there was no indoor growing, and it's comparable.
Yeah.
I mean, $1 or $2 difference. So February, March will be the real tell. But I think a combination of the lighting sources that I'm using, a little bit more conscious when it comes to lights on in other places. Also, even for 2019, I wasn't at home as much either. So yeah, I mean, I feel pretty good about it still being a very cost effective way to garden.
Yeah.
So
you do the math. I mean, I did the math on the seedling, just 1 tray of seedlings on the bottom of my flowers. It's $300 worth of plants. And I still have room for 1 more tray. So, I mean, you do the math. I'll spend an extra $10 on save $300, so you heard it here first, people.
So wait. There is a cost-effective way to start 60 tomato plants. Is that what you're saying? That's what I heard, people.
There is. There is. Listen to the Backyard Gardens TV, and we're going to walk you right through it.
Absolutely.
So look, Batavia, before we close out the show, which I'm trying to do currently, is next week we're having the compost gentleman on. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, my goal in that whole episode is to have you start a compost pile, and I'm going to drive the interview in that direction. Cool.
I didn't know that's where you were headed, but of course you are. I mean, you know what? You're in North Carolina, so you can try anything.
Maybe he's got a good tip to help you with your fears. How's that? Let's just be open. Let's be open.
Yeah, I'm open to it.
Let's do
and
it.
I just need guarantees. In a life where there are no guarantees, I need guarantees is all.
Okay. We'll work on it.
So, yeah.
All right, people, you heard it.
Why did I see this coming? I was really excited about this. Okay, all right, let's go.
New year, new Batavia. Ain't happening no more. All right, people. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show, and check out Tuesdays, our mini-sodes. They're coming out every Tuesday. They're just a small portion of what Batavia and I have to say about some kind of subject. And stay safe, be strong, wear a mask, don't lick handrails, and y'all have a good day.
See ya.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you want to see what we're up to or just stay up to date on all the announcements regarding the show or anything gardening, then you can follow us on Instagram at Backyard Gardens TV.
We love seeing what you guys are doing, so use hashtag BYG Podcast in your posts, and we'll be sharing your gardens with the Backyard Gardens community.
And check us out on YouTube at Backyard Gardens, where we will post this show, all of our other shows, clips, and then also some gardening tips and just gardening entertainment. And you can see us at our website at backyardgardenstv.com. But that's it for today's show. So help us as we learn to grow and grow for change. And until next time, we'll catch you guys later. We'll call this one a wrap.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.